Well, welcome everyone. I'm Father Sinclair Oubre with the Diocese of Beaumont. I'm also the uh, animator for the cause of Captain Leonard LaRue, Brother Marinus. And I want to welcome today with us is David Watts because he is the author of Hope in Hungnam. Now, I don't exactly remember where I came across the book, um, but somehow it was mentioned there and it sat on my shelf for about 2 years, 3 years. And then I finally pulled it down earlier this year, and I began to read it. And as we joked first time we talked, Dave, I'm certainly reluctant to read anything about religious figures because there is this hagiography that takes place that's trying to elevate the person so high that the story itself is really bad. But I really enjoyed your book.
Good.
It took some very interesting twists and turns.
Mhm.
And I just want to first ask you, who are you? Where are you from? Being that you're a brother Texan, uh,
Yeah.
raw. And how'd you get around to finding this text itself?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a quick story. I was born in Alabama. My dad was a preacher, active in the Church of Christ. And so we moved around a bit. Eventually found our way to Texas, around Houston, Deer Park, and Humble for some years when I was in junior high and high school. Moved away, California and Kentucky and different places. Anyway, when wife and I got married in '89, we moved to Kentucky and we were there about 5 years, made it to Chicago, got transferred. Anyway, I was traveling so much for work. We said, let's go back to Texas where we've got family. And so we settled in Longview over in East Texas. And it was there that, one evening I was just on Dish Network or whatever, and some sort of History Channel special popped up about Korean War veterans that would go back for a big reunion each year and of course meet their South Korean counterparts. And that was interesting. But in the middle of it, there was this little 10 or 15-minute sort of rabbit trail about, this evacuation. The narrator was saying, there's this amazing evacuation no one knows about in the U.S. And, that, 14,000 people, were rescued in this evacuation. Well, 100,000 total, but this one ship, it kind of zoomed in and said this one ship took 14,000, a world record. It was just a cargo ship. And I remember the narrator made the point that everybody knows the name Schindler, and did amazing work saving Jews from Nazi Germany. But he made the point no one knows the name LaRue, Captain LaRue, and they should, And it just hit me at that moment, like, wow, this is important history that ought to be preserved. These guys aren't going to live forever. This would have been about 2006, I suppose, when I heard this. And it just stuck with me, and the story kind of captivated me. I started doing research and found a lot of first. I was interested in kind of first. Well, that's not the exact word. Maybe primary sources, where at least like a newspaper in 1958 wrote about this, or 1960 somebody wrote about it, published it. So I gathered up all that I could. I eventually came across Mr. Lunny. He lived just north of New York City. Was able to go spend time with him and yeah, long story short, pulled together his story and met or was introduced to Burley Smith and Merle Smith, two of the other fellows that were still living. Got their stories. They introduced me to Korean man who was pretty aged, but he was a boy on the ship in the evacuation with his father. And so got his story, and it just kept turning in my mind. Couldn't let go of it, and started writing and didn't know what I was doing really. I'd written some short stories previously, but not a novel and kept working on it, and one thing led to another, and that kind of brought me to. There's more parts I'm leaving out, but that brought me to the story, and my decision. We needed to publish that to preserve it. I felt like there was at least one narrative, non-fictional book about this. But I thought, they're important, but sometimes can be a little dry. And sometimes we learn best when it's somewhat turned into a historical fiction. Weave in some fictional elements, but give the whole structure the historical accuracy. So that's what I thought to do. And so,
Yeah,
yeah.
I thought you captured well the tension that was taking place. So here the Koreans were under the Japanese from like what 1933 or 34.
Mhm,
Brutal situation. I
mhm.
read a book, the rape of Nanking,
Right.
last year, and it goes beyond our imagination.
Mhm.
It even challenges the Nazis in the concentration camps,
Yes, very
to
brutal.
read about the Japanese in China, and also the situation in the Korea. And then, just as you finally get the Japanese imperialist out, now you have the Chinese communist and the North Korean communist who begin to manifest some of the same brutality. I remember in Ship of Miracles how Gilbert makes the point that if you did not make the Meredith Victory, you were never seen. I mean, it's been years since I read it,
Yeah,
but
right.
I remember that one of the guys, one of the Koreans left the ship or left the line to get on the ship to go find some other family members. He didn't make the ship,
Right,
and he was never heard from again by his family.
right,
Oh, there's
exactly.
Burley Smith has joined us.
Hey,
Still
Burley, long
kicking,
time,
Burley.
Good afternoon. Can you hear
lo-
me?
Yeah, just fine, just fine.
long time no
Yeah,
see, Burley. Good to see you.
Good.
Yeah, I was just
this is
mentioning
like
your
a
name.
reunion.
Yeah, just mentioning your name that you were key to give me stories and
Well,
experiences that I was able to weave into the book a little bit.
I could never have plugged in if it weren't for my faithful wife, who's just got all the wires in their proper sockets here.
It was so good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Uh,
it was a very interesting story, and the other thing that comes up in Gannon's book, and also I think in your book also, when the Army comes on board to talk to LaRue, um, he doesn't consult, which is sort of surprising as a merchant mariner myself. But he doesn't consult his chief mate or anybody else like that. He just immediately says, "Yes, we will take them on board,"
yeah.
and immediately goes in and takes that action and moves in to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. That is how I understood it. And Burley, you could probably confirm that, but that was my understanding that LaRue just said, fill the ship up. And yeah,
As a mate, we just knew that the skipper, pardon me, had said they're coming aboard. He had met with whatever Army official had come up earlier, and of course the dock was jammed with what was it, 14,000? Well, many more than 14,000, all just milling about on the dock, ready to come aboard. So uh, the skipper just said, pack them in as tightly as you can, and that was what we did.
yeah, yeah. It's amazing. Yeah.
So how long did it take you? You said you came across this Discovery Channel show in
Mhm.
around 2006, and then I saw the publication date is like 2012.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it may have been History Channel or Discovery Channel, I
One of
forget
them.
which, but one of those type of shows. And must have been about 2006. It took about 6 years. Now that wasn't real steady. Sometimes you kind of get infatuated with it and write a bunch, and then you forget about it for a few months, and then you come back to it. But the last year really was pretty solid, and I had a lot of business trips to Paris, from Dallas to Paris. And back then they didn't have Wi-Fi on the planes, so there were no distractions. So I'd get the laptop out and just write. And so a lot of that book got pulled together in the air at 40,000 feet, to and from Paris, and sometimes just sitting in. I remember one Saturday, it was a beautiful day, and I'd seen all the things I wanted to see, and I just took the day to write and had the window open. It was kind of downtown Paris, classic. Somebody was out there on the organ or something playing Parisian music, and just wafting through the street. I did look out the window and was disappointed. It was like electronic stuff, not real, but anyway, so it's 6 years. The last year was kind of the heaviest part. Yeah.
Yeah, folks need to know how long it takes to do something like that. I remember when I wrote my master's thesis for my canon law license, that during that time, it was taking me about an hour a page to write.
Mm-hmm.
So 60-page book. This doesn't include necessarily the research, but just to bang out the page, to get
Mm-hmm.
your footnotes correct, to get all that type of stuff. And your
Mm-hmm.
book is about 250 pages
Mm-hmm.
long. Let's say that. Yeah, about 250 pages. That's 250 hours.
Yeah,
Weeks and weeks of
yeah,
continuous writing.
yeah. Takes a bit, and a lot of editing and some fact checking, and I hired an editor to try to make it professional because I do a lot of business writing, but writing a novel is a little different. And so she was able to help me a lot, clean it up. And Lonnie was very helpful to look at, some of the details I'd supplied. And not being a merchant mariner, I didn't know some of the language, and he helped me hopefully I got most of it right without doing too much damage. But yeah, it was a great process, though.
So another cause for sainthood is a New York woman named Dorothy Day. She's the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement. In her cause, when they did it, because part of a cause for sainthood is you have to take everything that they have written, at least publicly written, and transcribe it and log it and all those types of things. And she had, I think when they finished, about a ton worth of paper and 20,000 pages of stuff, because she wrote the Catholic Worker newspaper. She wrote tons of articles for other magazines. She was a writer, a journalist. In fact, she covered the what was it, 1930 or so March on Washington by World War I veterans. For this was before the VA bill or anything like that. So they were looking for some kind of support at that time. So the problem with her cause was we've got 20,000 pages that we have to transcribe and prepare, make copies of, triplet, and then ship that off to Rome. Just the freight rate on that's going to be incredible. Yeah. Our cause, and certainly Mary Mazzarella will agree with us, has been just the opposite problem, because I did come across the fact that LaRue had kept a diary, but that had gotten stuck in the Moore McCormick warehouse, and then United States Lines takes over that, and it's like there's no hope of ever finding that. That would have been interesting, other than like you've got the ship logs. But I wanted to ask, how much research did you do? How much traveling did you do to go and try to dig up some of the information that was there about the Meredith Victory or about the ship itself? Certainly, talking to Burley and talking to Lunny would give you a lot of details on that event. But did you do some traveling around also?
Well, not directly for that purpose. I had a business meeting in Tampa one year and found out there was the American Victory still afloat as a museum ship. So I took a day to go see that, and told the fellow there what I was doing and kind of sweet talked him into. I said, I'm writing this story. I would love to know what it felt like down there in the very bottom of the cargo area. And any chance I could see that? And he said, well, yeah, let's go. Just don't tell the Coast Guard. So, but that was helpful, and as well as to take the public tour and see the bridge and see the different rooms. And that was very impressive. Helped me a lot. Didn't do much else, but the insights from Merle and Burley and Mr. Lunny were really helpful, and then Mr. Wan, as giving that perspective of the refugee down inside, was really helpful, and just what it was like to be down there for 3 days. So, and then the rest of the research was really any news clippings I could find. I again tried to value those that had been written closest to the incident, and told the story.
That was an interesting part of the story of the father and son making their way to Hungnam. Now, was that son that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's Mr. Wan, who I think we called Oil Burley. They referred to him as Oil.
Yes. He's been a great source of information from what it was like to be on the side of the refugees.
Yeah. And I had to invent some, I think he gave me some details about the gathering at their house when, I think his mother especially said, you've got to take the boy, because they knew that the Chinese or the North Koreans would enlist any male that was probably above the age of 11, or so.
So this was a conscription issue and not a persecution execution issue.
I guess so. But I think in general they just knew the Chinese would be very cruel to them. They may have, if I have a memory that they may have suspected that they would sympathize with the Americans, because the Americans had been all the way up to pretty much the Yalu River, And maybe there was a suspicion on the part of the Chinese or the North Korean soldiers. Well, you must have been helping the Americans, you know. So it was dangerous either way, and that was the perception. And so they left and made their way down to Hunnam. And then, you know, Burley, it was a number of years ago, we had that great reunion at Lunny's house. You and Merle and Mr. Wan were there. And I heard from Mr. Wan at the time, you know, a little extra detail. He said, when we left, we thought we'd be coming home soon, that the Americans, you know, would regroup down south and then push back up and retake this territory. And we'd be reunited with his family, but that never happened, of course. So it's kind of heartbreaking. Yeah.
Historically, though, there was after the war, after the armistice was signed, there was wasn't there a 6-month period in which families could rejoin? You know, North Koreans could come down and South Koreans could go up.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Yeah,
I'd never heard that, Father. No.
Maybe I'm thinking of Vietnam. Honestly, maybe I'm thinking of Vietnam, that they may have been that situation.
Yeah, that would be quite contrary to most of the impressions that I've had over the years as to the enmity, particularly I've just finished. I don't have a copy of it here, but that book on the Korean War by a British military man. David, you probably know what his name is. I don't have it here. It's an excellent book. He describes how among the British military, the soldiers, they were desperately anxious not to be captured by Koreans, the North Koreans, because as a group, the British considered them much more cruel than the Chinese. So if they had the option to be captured by one group or the other, they would definitely place themselves in the hands of the Chinese.
Fascinating.
And I've thought about that quite a bit, and I've got to write something. I've just had. I'm sorry, I don't have all these things at my fingertips, but there's 404 pages that I've just got. I don't know if Father, you saw the work that was sent just this last week by a female Korean educator working at the University of down in the southwest of the U.S. either.
Oh.
Yeah, Texas. You haven't seen that yet?
No, I haven't. So forward it to me, please.
I must. Yeah, I must. I know Jonathan's got a copy of it, and well, the point is that this lady, who is a Korean American, writes beautifully in English. 404 pages of it, as you can imagine. She goes very deeply into the religious connections of the refugees that we took on the Meredith Victory. And she sort of poo-poos the whole story of LaRue and the more sanctity, if you want to call it, of his actions. I've really got to make sure you guys get a copy of this if you haven't seen it already. Jonathan said he's not at all surprised because she mentions a couple of sources. She's a fairly young woman, I think. She mentions a couple of sources in there that Jonathan says associate with rather nasty views of what was going on among the refugees that we took, and that there was nothing saintly or kind or religious about the motives of the Americans. And she keeps referring to the American Empire, how you've got to get this. I'll make a note to send a copy of it to both of you after.
Burley, that's Jonathan who?
Jonathan's got it too. He knows
Jonathan who? Who is
Jonathan at the Korea Society in New York.
Oh, okay.
And one of his reactions was he said he wondered what my reaction would be to this, having lived with these people for 5 days.
Yeah.
This lady, and I'm sorry I don't have a copy of it right here in front of me. I didn't print it. I thought I wouldn't go into the good pages, but her whole attitude is one of um, the religious affiliation of so many of these Koreans that we took, and how they were getting passes from the American authorities, particularly among the Protestant refugees, that they showed to get on the ship and through the lines at Hungnam to get down to the port, something I'd never heard of before at all. And I've promised to write a comment over the next week or so when I have a chance on my counter to much of what she's saying, because we saw absolutely no mark on the ship of any religious groupings of these people. It was just thousands and thousands of people milling about on the shore by the ship, desperate to get out. And she paints a very different picture. You'll be very interested in this whole thing with the religious slant that she gives.
David, going back to the Hope in Hungnam book, near the end, as the Meredith Victory is being loaded, you have this place in which sort of a warehouse where a lot of the refugees are just staying under South Korean guard, and then early in the morning it's like, let's go, boys, and they go. With what Burley's saying, was that your novel drawing the picture there, or were you drawing that from Juan?
From Mr. Juan, he described that they, had some place where they had to sort of sleep overnight, and then they were awakened and told to go out in the street and line up. And the specific detail he gave, which I thought was interesting, was they were told to hold on to the man in front of them, and then they were sort of marched or run through the streets, and that was kind of his description of it. And then I tried to embellish it a bit with, the thoughts of what the city might look or feel like then, with, as I understood it, the North Koreans firing overhead toward where Burley was, and I think the Missouri and others offshore firing back. And I just envisioned this nighttime scene of, some degree of projectiles back and forth and maybe fire, and just marching through the streets to get to the ship. And so it's a little bit of from Oil's, Mr. Wan's account, and a little bit of, I guess, narrative license of what I imagine.
I think, David, that probably by the time there must have been some pretty, well, I'm assuming that there was some sort of control at the entrance to the city that we never saw, because by the time we interacted with the Korean refugees, it was just tens of thousands of them milling about in a huge mass on the shore beside the ship. And there was no disciplining them. They were, we don't, none of us recalled seeing much of the U.S. military at that point. They must have been there. Right. And certainly there were senior representatives who came aboard and treated with Captain LaRue to tell him what was happening and what they would like him to do. But it was just, to us, it was a huge mass of humanity.
Right.
And how this Korean lady who's written the 400-page treatise talks about the distinction between the Protestant Koreans and the. Do you know offhand, Father, what the percentage is? One of the things I meant to look up after I got this the other day. But I would have thought that the percentage couldn't have been more than 20% of Christians in Korea at that time. Would you?
Yeah, the biggest Christian group in Korea actually is Presbyterians. The biggest collection of Presbyterians in the world is in Korea. And then there is a long history, especially in the 1900s or the 1800s, where the Catholics and the Catholic missionaries. Oh, excuse me. Let me restart this process. Korea is unique in the Catholic Church, in the sense that the faith was not brought there by missionaries and missionary priests, but rather Korean intellectuals who would go to Beijing or China, where the Catholic missionaries were, came in contact with the teachings and found it philosophically interesting, and so they brought the teachings back to the to Korea. That's my dog going out. Bringing the so they brought the teachings back. So it's the only instance ever in which it was a lay movement, sort of an intellectual lay movement that brought the faith into Korea, and then eventually some missionary priests came to bring the sacraments from China to Korea, and eventually they developed by the 1900s an indigenous clergy. But Korea is very interesting in that it breaks that usual model of Western missionaries arriving, preaching, growing the faith, and moving forward.
Would you hazard a guess, though, at the percentage of Koreans who in 1950 were either Catholic or Protestant?
I would say probably about 20 to 30%.
Yeah, that's what my guess.
Who were Christian at that time. It wasn't the Philippines, but it was clearly a significant number.
Well, my point on this was that the way she describes the group of Koreans who were coming out is that they were all afforded with passes, either Methodist or Presbyterian or Catholic. And she doesn't mention a very strong group of Catholics, but she says the majority of them were Protestant. But we certainly saw no trace of that at all. And she, if you take her at the way she describes it, was these folks were marching down to the city in homogeneous groups, staying together and getting onto the ship together. We saw absolutely none of that. I mean, it was just a huge mass of souls clambering up to get on board and get the hell out of town.
Yeah. I think that's the beauty of the story. I never saw any, in what I could read and research and stories I heard, never saw any consideration of religious affiliation. It was just people, just souls that were looking for escape. And
because she leaves you with the impression, the author does, that these interesting came down, and my picture of them was, from the photographs that we've seen as they left the Chosin Reservoir, for example, the Marines followed by these crowds and crowds of poor Koreans who just wanted to get away from the Chinese.
Yeah, just humanity. And as I read and understood, and Burley, you could confirm this, but LaRue knew that there was a chance he was taking on board saboteurs, North Korean army types or military types. And if I understand correctly, when the ship docked and was emptied and he went down and surveyed things, he found a pile of weapons and, at least some parts of is that your understanding as well?
We never heard that story. There well may have been, but we were down there as they got off. We went down to start shoveling the poo, and if there had been a pile of weapons, I think we made the 4 or 5 mates who'd been down there with me.
Yeah.
But David, the one thing that's always surprised me is not only on Meredith Victory, but the other ships. We, of course, had no guards. We had no armed militia on board. If there was a gun on board, it would have been the captain's pistol, and I suppose he had one on his safe somewhere. But any 4 or 5 of these people could have walked up to the bridge during the trip. If you can imagine, my cabin was on the same level as the other deck officers, just below the bridge level, and none of the refugees came up to that level. Burley Smith talks about people poking their hands through his porthole at night because he was on a lower deck to get a cup of water.
Right.
They didn't try to come up onto the upper decks. Any 5 of them could have walked up onto the bridge and killed any of us. It was me and one seaman for 8 hours a day up on the bridge in the middle of the night or all day long. There was one mate who was on his 8-hour watch, 2 4-hour watches, and they could have just gone up, killed him very easily, and taken the ship 50 or 60 miles north into North Korea if there had been any organized saboteurs on board.
Right.
There's a miracle to me that I think that we weren't just taken over and
Sure.
made a war prize.
Sure, sure. And a lot of mines in the harbor, as I understood it.
It was incredible. And you know, the
Yeah.
funniest thing about it, I don't know if you've ever seen this written up. The day of the invasion, after we finally got in and got anchored, um, the Marines were on the beach fighting their way inland. The American cruisers were there. There were 2 American cruisers and 2 British cruisers anchored nearby. And somehow one mine, one of the typical old-fashioned mines, you know, with the horns that sticks out, had broken loose. And the tides, of course, to get 30-foot tides, you've got very strong currents coming and going at the change of each tide. And we saw floating by us at a great rate of knots this loose mine that had just broken loose. And following it was a little patrol boat, must have been a Korean patrol boat. And he was firing away at this mine with a deck gun that he had up on the foredeck. And he just followed this thing all the way out through the anchored invasion fleet, firing away at it. And Burley Smith, I think, said afterwards, on the incoming tide, 8 hours later, he was still firing at it as it came back in. I never believed that.
That's funny. That's funny.
So
Yeah.
back in the 90s, I was assigned by the Seafarers Union to a ship that we had pulled out of the reserve fleet here, and we were activating it. And our bosun was E.K. Bryan, and he had been on the Robin Gray during the Hungnam evacuation. And in fact, you'll see the Robin Gray come up in some of the history, picking up people. I think they actually did mostly military equipment and stuff like that. But he had described to me, watching the Chinese army coming down the hill outside of Hungnam, and now certainly the Missouri was pounding the heck out of it as they were coming down, but almost like a march of ants as they were making their way down to the city itself. Did you see that, Burley, at all from your position on your ship?
Yeah, we didn't actually see the bodies, Father. The hills behind the port, where perhaps they started about a mile and a half in from the port to the west of the port. And that's where the Chinese troops were. We never knew how many of them were Chinese and how many were North Korean, but that's where the enemy was, and we presumed they were mostly Chinese. And what we saw was the American Air Force was strafing that area. So we were getting a profile, a side view, as these American aircraft, fighter aircraft, would swoop down in and machine gun and drop explosives on these people in the enemy trenches. During the night, you could see an occasional campfire there. That it was crazy because we were the cruisers, the American cruiser and the British cruiser that were anchored right near us, were lobbing shells into them all night and all day long. The Missouri, we never did see the Missouri. She was offshore. I think they were keeping her out of harm's way, and she was a pretty big vessel to get into those closed areas and have risk of hitting a mine. But she was lobbing these 16-inch shells from offshore. And by the time they got into us, they were at very low altitude. And they didn't scream as you see in the movies. It was the sound of a train going by as each shell would go ahead. They were very low. They were only a couple of 100 feet in the air by the time they got we didn't. Yeah.
So when you guys got ready to sail, you were on the outboard side of the North Cuba. When you guys pulled in the lines, were there anybody visibly on the dock still waiting to be taken on board?
Yes, and one of the admirals, I'm sure you've read a lot more about this than I have, Father, but one of the senior Navy admirals, his name comes up often in the evacuation information. He says that that there were at least as many left behind in the area as we got off. So if he's correct, there were 90,000 more North Korean civilians, not necessarily all on the dock area because we didn't see that many, but within the port environs waiting to get the heck out of town. I don't, we of course were, all the mates were down, each of us was alone down in a hold as we loaded these people because we thought that our job was to have them all stand up until we packed them in on each deck, the lower hold and then the lower tween deck and then the upper tween deck. So we just made, as they came in on these pallets that were built, wooden pallets, as these were lowered by the ship's cargo gear into each hold, our crew managing these things lowered them down. They just stepped off and we made them stand up, walk back into the sides of each hold until we had the entire deck jam packed with people. And then when they were all in, we took the big steel hatch beams, put them in place over their heads, and then put the wooden hatch boards in between the beams so it was sealed off. And then we loaded the next deck on top. That was the system.
How did they do ventilation for the lower holes?
Well, you know, when you look at the picture of a Victory ship, you see these big ventilator cowls that stick up on deck. They're not mechanical. And you pray that the breeze will carry it down there because there was no mechanical, nothing pushing the air down in there. None of them, we weren't, if you had been a refrigerated ship, of course, they could have had spaces where you've got cold air coming in, but it was cold enough so they didn't have to worry about temperature.
Oh, true.
But there was no forced ventilation other than these. There'd be 4 at each of the 5 hatches. There were 4 of these huge cowlings that would catch the air as long as they were turned to face the wind.
So you mentioned the cold because certainly I've seen many pictures of the Chosin Reservoir battles, and as many soldiers died from freezing to death as who were wounded and froze to death as opposed to from the wounds themselves. How cold was it there on December 22nd, 23rd when you were in Hungnam?
You know, that's interesting. I don't know that anybody ever took a temperature. And of course, we had been running back and forth from Korea to Japan for 6 months at that point. And it was cold. There's one picture of me that you may have seen on a searchlight up on the flying bridge, wearing a coat that I'd traded a soldier for. I gave him some cigarettes and he gave me his coat because otherwise we just had no gear at all for cold weather, the crew. So we all traded our cigarette rations or whiskey or whatever. Pardon me. I don't know. It was cold enough so that ice and snow didn't melt on the dock during the night. In the daytime, it did. And we never suffered on the ship from the cold, and I don't think the refugees ever suffered from the cold. And certainly once you loaded a hatch with 10,000 people, not in one hatch, but 2,000 or 3,000 in a confined space, the body heat would have kept them all quite pleasantly warm.
Yeah, seeing the main deck where the folks, when you sail from Hungnam down to Busan, the main deck with the folks shoulder to shoulder, but it just strikes me that it doesn't appear to be as cold in the pictures as we see in the documentaries of the retreat from Chosin Reservoir of being that cold.
That's interesting, isn't it? And we never remarked, we the crew, on the temperature during that period, either in Hungnam or on the run down to Koji. as a matter of fact, in Koji, some of the pictures where you see the folks smiling, one of the mass photographs uh, in Koji as they're getting off, you see some of them smiling for the first time when they realize they're really going to be getting off in a Korean port, and they see green grass, and it was quite, the temperatures were quite comfortable. They were probably in the mid 40s, I would think, during the daytime. But
Nice.
For the Koreans, that wasn't bad.
Yeah.
And we were used to it because we'd been living in it for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
David, let me come back to you.
Yeah.
When you were writing the book and studying it, um, you were aware that after LaRue had left the sea in 1954, that he had joined the Benedictine monastery.
Mm-hmm.
You're the son of a Church of Christ pastor. You shared with me that for a while there you carried on in that tradition also.
Right.
I engaged in this because of the extraordinary virtue and courage that he manifested numerous times, and also there's sort of this interesting inverted uh, uh, ability to survive, so that it seems like there were so many opportunities in which he could have died, and yet he didn't, so that he could eventually be the captain of the Meredith Victory to rescue the 15,000. I mean, he could have capsized the vessel in the Incheon landing. He could have been one of the 5 ships sunk during PQ-13 going on to Murmansk. He could have been like the new Westminster City, a bomb, not a Luftwaffe bomb goes right through the ship and could have blown it up at the dock.
Right.
And yet he seems to survive all these things for this culminating moment when he simply says, "We will do this." And then, even in spite of all the mines there, and I just saw the other day, I think maybe it was in your book, talking about the fear of Soviet submarines once they cleared into the Pacific Ocean, or into that area. Where were you as a pastor, Christian writer, in relationship to LaRue's life and his future life as a Benedictine?
Yeah, certainly, we have some ideas in common, of course, and certainly we have some different ideas, right? Some different understanding of Scripture. But I looked at him as a religious man, very sincere, based on everything I could read, who had tremendous faith. And, to me, it was a story of do the right thing, and the rest will sort itself out. He had faith in the Lord, and I applaud that, of course. And I always say, when it comes to the Lord's providence, I don't know exactly what the Lord has decided every time, unless he reveals it to me, through his word, I believe. But I look at it as a Christian and say, it sure looks to me like he was a man doing the right thing for the right purpose, acting out of faith, out of courage, had plenty of reasons to say no, I think. And so it sure looks to me like, I envision, at least in my human wisdom, the Lord looked down, here's 14,000 souls and a very good, proper mission to take them to safety. And my opinion is it sure looks like the Lord blessed that effort tremendously and took care of all of them, Burley and the whole crew and all the 14,000, and delivered them safely. And I like to think about how the world, changed. It's, I guess, immeasurable to think about how the world changed with 14,000 growing up in freedom, or really 100,000 or so. But I think that's a marvelous thing, And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of my take on it. We have some different views on things, but I think he was a sincere religious man that acted by faith and courage and conviction. And sure looks to me like the Lord looked down on him and watched over him.
Gave him the courage those times.
Yeah.
A remarkable thing about LaRue was that there was never any need for him, he must have felt in his own mind, to exert his authority or to direct the crew to do this or to do that. he was just absolutely relaxed in his own mind, that he knew what he was doing, and that the people who reported to him would carry out whatever it was. He didn't have to impress on any of the crew what their job was. He he knew what he wanted. There was nothing lackadaisical about him, and we in the crew never tried to test, to get around him, because he was just an authority that you knew he knew what he was doing. The only time, I think I've told you, Father, the only time I ever saw him actually make any reference to religion or to proper behavior was one night in Tokyo. The ship was lying alongside. The stevedores had stopped loading. We were loading for either Incheon or for Busan. And the stevedores had gone home, so it was all quiet. And the crew had just finished dinner at 5, so it was about 6 o'clock. And it was cold, but the crew was all filing ashore. I was on watch, so I'm standing up on the bridge wing, port bridge wing, and LaRue popped up. We didn't spend much time shoulder to shoulder with the captain. He'd be there for a minute or two, and you'd exchange a word or two, and that was it. You as the mate carried on. And as I was standing on the bridge wing up there watching the guys go ashore, and LaRue came over and said to me, "There they go." He said, "Looking for, what a shame." He said, "They're looking for booze and women." And it was the only comment I'd ever heard from him that made me think that he did have standards that he was sorry to see being broken and smeared. He never preached, not in my, he never swore. He was not your typical captain. He was completely opposite from, I only sailed with 5 or 6 captains in the 3 or 4 years that I was going to sea with Moore McCormick. And each one, I could tell you stories about their characters, whether it was booze or whether it was sex or whether it was theft or whether it was all sorts of wild stories. As you know, Father, people who go to sea tend to be strange people sometimes. But LaRue was just a very calm, self-assured individual who, without saying it, transferred this sort of atmosphere to those who worked for him. And he never had to do any preaching or pushing or reprimanding. I never saw any. The only thing you'd ever see if he wasn't happy with somebody was a note in the occasional ship's log where he would say that somebody's, you'd list the behavior of each person in the 47 or 48 crew. And there were a couple of unsatisfactories among the lower crew. 1 or 2 of the officers got a good instead of a very good, but that was Rue's way of running the ship.
Yeah, nice.
Well, I want to open it up though. If the folks who are joining us would like to turn on their screens, and I'm going to open it up for questions or statements from the folks for the next couple of minutes to either David or to Burley.
Well, I'll sit here for a moment. And so first, let me just say that I have not yet read the book, David, but I'm intrigued and would like to. And so I appreciate the time you're taking today to share. I think one of the things that ever since I heard the story, first time I heard and met Burley was back at the AOS USA conference earlier this year. I was reminded, or maybe alerted to this fact that going to Kings Point, the number 142 is burned into your psyche. The number of cadet midshipmen that died during World War II as cadets, and so that number is burned in, and everyone who goes to Kings Point knows the sanctity of 142. But I think what we lose sight of is the number of times that merchant mariners do very noble things all the time. And so my very first ship as a cadet, I mean, my very first leg of my very first ship as a cadet, leaving Oakland, heading to Taiwan, we participated in a rescue of a vessel that had sunk, and we rescued the crew.
Mm.
And that I think just your book and this story just is a good reminder of all the news that we often hear about merchant mariners all over the world who are involved with, with tragedies or disasters or things like that. There's a lot of noble and good things happening by merchant mariners. So that's just an affirmation. So I appreciate it. But I've got 2 questions. I'll let you decide which of the 2 to answer, if either. So my experience in writing an extended thesis, dissertation book is that you leave a lot on the cutting room floor. You'd like to, there's something, a rabbit trail you start following, you're like, this doesn't advance my book. And so you create a new document that says after the book. So one question would be, are there any trails that you would have liked to have pursued that you didn't? The second question, again, I'll let you decide whether either of these is worthy of an answer. Is after the book, were there facts, were there things that you discovered that you thought, wow, I really wish I had known that during the writing, so that I could have included that in the book. So those are my 2 questions. I'll let you answer.
Yeah, maybe somewhat related. I don't recall leaving too much out. I did, some of the women that read the book, men latch on to different parts of it. Women latch on to maybe the romance that I tried to write. I figured everybody, you got to have a little love story in there. And, it's probably not the most elegant romance in the world, but I tried to reflect the fact that this Korean woman was probably very reserved and, it's wartime and this and that. And so I'm not who are some of the big romance women that write, I forget their names, but, that I didn't go down that rabbit trail too much. I just left it more to the imagination of how people might come to know each other. And then there's one thing that when we met, whatever years ago those were, Burley at Lunny's house, and Mr. Wan was telling the story. To me, a detail I hadn't heard was how he and his father walked, from their village down to Hungnam. And just remember him talking about, I think they followed the railroad tracks because there was a lot of snow. And I remember him saying it was like waist deep or something. And I think that was a detail I had not heard and did not make it in the story. And so you can imagine, of course, he was 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever age he was, I forget now, maybe 12. So, and they're probably not, he wasn't real tall. So, but still that's a, significant thing, right? To leave home and walk several days through the snow. I think that was a little detail. When I heard that, I thought, oh, I wish I had added that little element into the story. But anyway, so I don't remember leaving too much out. I did try to reflect a little bit of, toward the end, the main character, Jack Stiles, I think I have it when the ship gets to Kojido, that he has a bit of an episode, kind of my attempt, maybe not the best attempt, but my attempt to kind of reflect the realities of what we call PTSD now, right? And, of what was probably not well understood at that time. But I can't think of anything in particular that I kind of had to leave aside.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. And especially having not read the book, I didn't know how you treat the weather side of things. But hearing Burley talk about just now saying that, the crew just didn't discuss the weather. It was cold and they needed to take steps. But to hear that, the boy at least remembers walking through such deep snow. I mean, that would have been, for a child, just bitter, miserable.
Yeah. I do remember, as you mentioned something there, it made me think there was a little line I thought to go down, but I didn't, of what Burley mentioned, the air support. And I forget the name of the fighters, one of the first fighter jets. Was it the F-86 or something? I forget.
Yes, I don't recall exactly. Later, the pilot of one of them, later on, I was at Harvard at the business school, and one of my classmates had been a pilot there, flying one of these things. I don't remember what the category. I could almost draw the plane, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a movie out a couple of years ago about, and I forget the name of it, but a black aviator that flew, I guess, overcame some challenges, but got shot down. I think he got trapped in his plane on the ground, and his buddy kind of had to drop weapons to destroy it all. I think I forget the name of the movie, but that was a thread I was familiar with, and I thought to kind of go down that trail a little bit, but it felt like it might be taking me a little too far off the path. But there's a lot of untold stories, amazing heroism from that time. Yeah.
Doreen,
Thank you.
Doreen.
First, I would just like to say hello to Burley. It's great to see you here again.
Hi, Doreen.
Yeah.
Nice to see your picture.
Thank you. But David, I have not read your book yet, but very much looking forward to it. For the Brother Marinus Guild, are there sources that you could recommend to us for our research purposes? We certainly know Burley and have actually recently touched base with Captain LaRue's family. But I'm curious if you found other unique sources of information about Captain LaRue.
It was mostly those kind of newspaper clippings I Googled and found, and somewhere I've got those stashed away, and I'll see if I can find those and send you those clippings. I put emphasis on the ones, from as close to this event as possible. And, some were not big journalistic, pillars, but Reader's Digest, I think, had some, and other, publications had stories about it. If I recall correctly, and Burley, you could remind me, after he became a Benedictine monk, I think he went and spoke at a press club meeting around D.C. or somewhere, and spoke about it. Maybe. Okay.
I'm not familiar with that.
That's true.
Yeah, some event, and ironically, I'll search eBay occasionally for just little artifacts from the Korean War, or I'll search for the Meredith Victory, and I was on some trip and found a little auction for tickets to that event, to that where LaRue was speaking, and I have those stashed away somewhere. But I can sure try to find those all those little PDFs I pulled aside that kind of told the story. That might be useful.
That would be tremendously helpful to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Father Mark, you have a question? Oh, there he is. My seminary was in Oakland, California. Let me open this thing up. There we go. He asks, my seminary was in Oakland, California. I had recurring ministry in Benicia and would cross the Carquinez Strait often and see the ships of the mothball fleet moored in the bay, and just wonder about all the history of those ships lived through. I know that the Meredith Victory was once there. Is it still moored there in some other bay or a museum, or was scrapped? I can answer that question. So actually, after World War II, the Mormac-Mar was, let's get the right ship here. After World War II, the Meredith Victory was laid up in the James River in Virginia. And so they crewed her up there, and LaRue took command of her there. The crew sailed through the Panama Canal and came to Oakland, and in Oakland, they loaded cargo there to go to Japan. And then they started shuttling between Japan and I guess the first thing was the Incheon landing once they got there, and then after that, then they started shuttling. After the war was over with, I think she was laid up in In fact, I know that she was laid up in the reserve fleet up in San Francisco Bay, and she stayed there until the early '90s, maybe. And this is one of those incredible ironies, that she was sold to a company and scrapped in China. So again, you've got this interesting situation where the ship, in a way fought or saved people from China, eventually becoming a victim of the Chinese scrapyard over there. But the Maritime Administration did appreciate the value of the ship at that time, and so they took off the name board for it. They took off the building plaque. They took off the telegraph from the bridge and some other things that are there. Now, I've written to the Maritime Administration saying, hey, we've got this cool cause going on. Can I have this stuff? And they said, no, we're going to keep it right now because this is stuff. But we at least know that there is some stuff, and I've got a list of stuff that MARAD is holding, the United States Maritime Administration is holding right now. So she sailed, and I guess after she finished in 1952 or so, I think they laid her back up at that point. And then she stayed there for a while. And then we've watched that because we have you have a reserve fleet in the James River in Virginia. You've got one here in the Neches River in Beaumont. And then you have the other one in San Francisco. And you literally had over 100 ships in the Beaumont fleet. And especially after Desert Storm, they realized that all of these old steam breakbulk vessels, first, were old, and second, they weren't going to meet the military cargo process that was there. And so car carriers are much more important today of rolling the vessel, rolling the tanks on, rolling the Humvees on, or rolling the helicopters on, as opposed to taking a boom and lifting them into the hulls of the ship at that time. Sure. The new ships today are 800 to 900 feet long. These guys were 485 foot long. I just got off the Velma Likes, and she was built in 1967. So, quickly you do the math on that. 20 years after, or a little more than 24 years after the Meredith Victory was built, the ship is now 100 feet longer as a standard freighter than what was the Victory ship, which was bigger than the Liberty ships by a couple of dozen feet or something like that. But it was bigger than the Liberties that had been built before that. Mary, Mazzarella, do you have any questions to add?
Well, I just wanted to say hello to Burley. It's been a long time. You were going to come and give testimony, and we had that snowstorm, and you couldn't come, as you remember. So we had to cancel that out. The other thing, I am anxious to look at this book. But another thing, I was in high school at the time, and I remember the thing about Korea was that it was cold, cold, and cold. And if you look at the monument in Washington, those men are in ponchos, and that describes, I think, the terrible cold and snow and ice that they went through. And again, as a young person, I remember some of it. I remember Sigmund Rhee, I remember Busan, and it's really amazing to do this work now for me.
I've never been as cold in my life as we were from October onward. Lunny and Merle Smith and I hitchhiked in early October from Busan, where the ship was. We thought we'd hitchhike.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. Yes.
And we thought we'd be gone for the afternoon and back for work in the morning, but we ended up hitchhiking by aircraft. It was a lone pilot in his C-47 going back to Japan. And he said, well, come on, boys, I'll take you up to Daegu from K9, which was the airfield for Busan. So we thought, oh, great fun. And we got up to K9, to Daegu area. And the Allies had just taken back Daegu after the Busan perimeter battles, and were finally driving the Koreans back north. And we said there was one sergeant running the airfield in a tent by the side of this single runway. And we said, where can we get a plane back? We got to go to work tonight. And he said that there ain't no aircraft coming through here. This guy stopped just for a little bit of fuel going back to Japan. He said, I'd suggest you walk over to the road there and hitchhike. So the three of us walked over to the road, and we must have stood there for 2 hours in the late afternoon. Nothing came by. It was a beat up 2-lane asphalt road. Finally, along comes a tank, a Sherman tank, going back up to the front after being repaired. And behind it, the crew of another Sherman that had been so beat up that they couldn't repair it. So they were just going back to the line as a relief crew. And they said, well, come on, we're going north back up to the front line, but you better come with us because it's getting dark. So we rode on these in this tank. I was lucky. I got the assistant driver's seat, so it was only my head sticking out. But I remember that we got up to Kimpo, and the tank said, "We're not going onto the airfield, so we're going to leave you here in the dark by the side of the road." We thought, well, this is not very encouraging, but we walked into the entrance to Kimpo Airfield in pitch dark, and we were in sort of khakis, but no uniforms. And the guards at the gate, the American guards said, "Well, who are you and where are you coming from? Where are you going?" And we finally talked our way in without getting shot. We walked into this huge administration building that had no roof and no windows. And there was a sergeant running this thing. We never did meet any officers except a young lieutenant the next morning who accused us of being reporters and we shouldn't get in the way of the real fighters. But we walked in and we hadn't been in there 10 minutes. There are all sorts of aircraft coming in from Tokyo and landing there at the Kimpo airfield, the main airfield for the capital. And all of a sudden, there are two huge explosions outside the building, and dirt and pieces started falling on the building. And the GIs, I'd never seen anybody go out through the window of a building, but these guys leapt out head first through these broken windows. And the three of us scrambled out and hid under a truck until finally they decided that it wasn't a local mortar platoon that was attacking us. It was a guy they called Bed Check Charlie, who was a Korean who had a small single engine aircraft, and he would come in the evening sometimes and push a couple of bombs or hand grenades out the door of his little airplane, and that would shut down Kimpo for the night. So everything had to stop. No more aircraft coming from Japan or going back. And that was the coldest night I ever spent, and that was October. The sergeant gave us little canvas cots and one thin blanket, and it was awful. I mean, so that place was a really cold area.
Wow, I can feel it.
David, I want to give you the final word. If you got any one last word to say.
Well, my original thought for doing this was to preserve history. So, guys like Burley lived it. I just tried to write something about it, but try to pass the torch down a little bit and just preserve it. I knew there were nonfiction treatments of it, and I really felt like I think I mentioned to you that the movie Saving Private Ryan to me made D-Day come alive. You knew about it, but it was almost too big to imagine. But when you zoom in on this one soldier, right, on a quest to find this other soldier, it made it very personal, right? And you kind of see yourself in those shoes. And that was a little bit of my model, to zoom in on something that was unimaginably huge, the rescue of 90 or 100,000 civilians, and try to zoom in on this one Marine and this one Korean woman. And presumably that story, semi-realistic, and probably did occur in some form or fashion multiple times, maybe, at least versions of it. So that was my goal, is to hope to preserve a little bit of the history, and I'm glad we did.
Well, thank you. And as I said, I truly enjoyed the book, Hope in Hungnam, and it's available through Amazon.
Yeah.
It's Kindle and
Kindle,
Kindle, and also maybe hardback also still.
Yeah,
there.
just that sort of paperback version, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the paperback version.
Yeah.
So you can have it. It's a nice summer read, and it gives you some insight into the post-Chosin Reservoir situation that was taking place there. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this. And David, I really do appreciate your insights and your reflections on this. I greatly appreciate it. And so at this point, I'm going to say thank you and stop the recording.